Shalom Aleichem. Peace be upon you and welcome back to the broadcast. I'm Shawn. Today we're looking at this week's Torah portion, Vayeshev. The ninth reading from the book of Genesis is named Vayeshev, which means, and he dwelt. The title comes from the first verse of the reading, which says, Now Jacob dwelt in the land where his father had sojourned, in the land of Canaan. Despite the portion's name and first verse, the story is actually about Jacob's son, Joseph, and how he was removed from the land of Canaan and dwelt in Egypt. The narrative follows Joseph from Canaan to Egypt to prison. In addition, this week's reading also contains the story of Judah and Tamar. So, what is on the agenda this morning? Genesis chapter 37, you go to chapter 40, verse 23. And here's kind of a short outline. You've got Joseph's dream. You have him sold by his brothers into slavery. You have this little side story of Judah and Tamar, which is a perfect example of why the scriptures are true. Because there's no chance that if you're making something up in the Hebrew Bible, that you would have this scandalous story about Judah, Yehuda, the one the Jews come from. You then have Joseph and Potiphar's wife, and you have the dreams of the two prisoners, and that's how the portion ends. I am going to do one of those things I do occasionally, which is where I bring up an interesting point but then don't have an answer for it. So you can look forward to that this morning. All right. I just want to kind of dive in. I am going to read from the King James Bible this morning. So open up your hearts. Let's see what the Word of God has to say to us, starting with chapter 37, verse 1. And Jacob dwelt in the land wherein his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brethren. And the lad was the sons of Bilhah, and with the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought unto his father their evil report. So please note, there's a lot of speculations about what that is. Obviously, Joseph's mother, Rachel, is dead. She has passed away. And so there seems to be this idea that he dwells with the two maidservants, which would be Jacob's concubines or wives as well, Bilhah and Zilpah. But it says that he brings an evil report about them to his father, and then it just moves on. Doesn't say anything else about it. I looked at a couple of different commentaries. The Hebrew Bible translation with commentary by Robert Alter suggested it was kind of like a tattletale thing where he was just kind of going back to his father with anything that they were doing or saying. Remember, one of these handmaids slept with his eldest son, Reuben. So that's possible. There's also a Jewish tradition that they were just kind of mean to Joseph, and he would report that. Verse 3. Now Yisrael loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many collars. And when his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his other brethren, they hated him, and could not speak peaceably unto him. And Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told his brethren, and they hated him yet the more. And he said to them, Hear, I pray you, this dream which I have dreamed. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf arose, and also stood upright, and behold, your sheaf stood round about, and made obstinance to my sheaf. And his brethren said to him, Shalt thou indeed reign over us? Or shalt thou indeed have dominion over us? And they hated him yet the more for his dreams, and for his words. And he dreamed yet another dream, and he told his brethren, and he said, Behold, I have dreamed a dream more. And behold, the sun and the moon, 11 stars made obstinance to me. And he told it to his father and to his brethren, and his father rebuked him, and he said unto him, What is this dream that thou hast dreamed? Shall I and thy mother, and thy brethren indeed come to bow down ourselves to thee, to the earth? And his brethren envied him, but his father observed the saying. So please know, Joseph has these dreams, which, if you've heard these stories before, you know that they're pointing to a future where Joseph is the second most powerful person really in the world at that time, being the second most powerful person in all of Egypt. And of course, the 11 stars bowing down to him represents his brothers will eventually have to bow down to him. Notice Jacob takes offense and says, "What is this? Or am I self and your mother?" It's interesting that he says mother when Joseph's mother has passed away. So obviously somebody is acting in that role. "Shall we bow down to you?" But Jacob, having spiritual eyes, a man who's wrestled with God, a man who saw the ladder reaching from the earth to heaven and the angels ascending and descending on it, Jacob has that foresight, that spiritual lens. He knows there is something to this. And as we can see here, it says, but his father, Joseph's father, observed the saying. So he kind of kept it in his heart, knowing that there was something to it. Continuing on. "And his brethren went to feed their flocks in Shechem. And Yisrael said to Joseph, Do not thy brethren feed the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send thee unto them. And he said to him, Here I am." So please note, the brothers have gotten to the point where they have nothing but disdain for their brother Joseph. I'm sure they can remember how when they were approaching Esau, they were all pushed to the front and Joseph was in the back to be protected. Even now, they're out taking care of the sheep. Where's Joseph? He's at home with his father. His father's going to send him out. Jacob also gave Joseph this special garment, which, by the way, I'm not saying this is true. I'm just saying it is a Jewish tradition, or at least one of the Jewish traditions, is that the garment was also that garment that had been handed down through the generations, starting with Adam and Eve. And if you read the book of Jubilees, I believe, sometimes I get them confused where I've read this, but I believe it was Jubilees found with the Dead Sea Scrolls, where it talks about how Noah took that garment onto the ark, and so forth and so on. We're going to talk more about the garment, not in those terms, but just something interesting about how it's used, the garment. Not specifically Joseph's garment. I'll get to that in a minute. Let's move forward. And he said unto him, Go, I pray thee, see whether they be well with the brethren, and well with the flocks, and bring me word again. So he sent him out of the vale of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. And a certain man found him, and behold, he was wandering in a field. And the man asked him, saying, What seekest thou? And he said, I seek my brethren. Tell me, I pray thee, where they feed their flocks. And the man said, They are departing hence, for I heard them say, Let us go to Dathan. And Joseph went after his brethren and found them in Dathan. And when he saw them afar off, even before he came near unto them, they conspired against him to slay him. And they said to one another, Behold, this dreamer cometh. Come now, therefore, let us slay him and cast him into the pit. And we will say, Some evil beast hath devoured him. And we shall see what becomes of his dreams. And Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands, and said, Let us not kill him. And Reuben said unto them, Shed no blood, but cast him into a pit that is in the wilderness, and lay no hand upon him, that we might rid him out of their hands, to deliver him to his father again. So please note, Reuben, the one who's really out of his father's favor. Why? Because he slept with his father's wife, one of the handmaids. But here, it's almost like he's trying to regain favor, maybe, right? Or maybe he's just learned something, or maybe he just has more compassion for his brother Joseph than his other brothers. It's hard to say. But he wants to deliver him out of his brother's hands, for they want to slay him, so that he can deliver him back to his father again. I'm sure that this will come up in the future. Let's keep that in the back of our minds. And it came to pass, when Joseph was come unto his brethren, that they stripped Joseph out of his coat of many collars that was on him. And they took him, and they cast him into a pit. And the pit was empty, and there was no water in it. And they sat down to eat bread, and they lifted up their eyes, and look, and behold, a company of Ishmaelites came from Gilead with their camels, bearing spicery and balm and myrrh, and going to carry it down to Egypt. And Judah said unto his brothers, What profit is it for us to slay our brother, and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, and our flesh. And his brethren were content. Please note, I'm just going to point out the poor character of Judah. I mean, it's just, you can't read this and overlook it. They all want to kill him. Reuben says, no, let's not kill him. Let's do something else, hoping that he can deliver him later. So they put him in a pit. But then Judah comes up with a brilliant idea. Hey, let's make some money at least. And let's sell him to the Ishmaelites as a slave. And then Judah's character gets worse, as we're going to see here in chapter 28. We're not quite there yet. Let's continue on. Then there passed by the Midianites merchantmen, and they drew and they lifted up Joseph out of the pit, and they sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they brought Joseph into Egypt. And Reuben returned into the pit, and behold, Joseph was not in the pit, and he rent his clothes. Please note, there's something interesting as well. Reuben apparently wasn't with the rest of his brothers when they did the selling. So his whole plan was to deliver his brother. He comes back, but no Joseph. And he returned to his brothers, and he said, The child is not, and whither shall I go? And they took Joseph's coat, and they killed a kid of goats, and dipped the coat in blood. And they sent a coat of many colors, and they brought it to the father, and said, This we have found. Know now whether it be thy son's coat or no. And he knew it, and he said, It is my son's coat. An evil beast hath devoured him. Joseph is without doubt rent in pieces. And Jacob rent his clothes, and he put sackcloth upon his loins, and he mourned for his son many days. And all his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, For I will go down into the grave unto my son mourning. Thus his father wept for him. And the Midianites sold him into Egypt unto Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, and of the captain's guard. So that's chapter 37. We're going to read chapter 38, which deals with this shame of Judah, if you will. And but I want you to keep in the back of your mind this story here where they took this garment, dipped it in blood, and used it to deceive Jacob into thinking that his son was devoured by a beast. And we'll circle back to that in a minute. But first we need to read chapter 38, which deals with this story of Judah and his daughter-in-law, Tamar. Let's begin. And it came to pass at that time that Judah went down from his brethren and turned into a certain Adullamite, whose name was Harah. And Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite, whose name was Shua. And he took her, and he went unto her. And she conceived and bare a son, and he called his name And she conceived again, and bare a son, and she called his name Onan. And she yet conceived and bare a son, and called his name Shelah. And he was at Keziv when she bare him. And Judah took a wife for his firstborn, whose name was Tamar. And Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord slew him. And Judah said to Onan, Go unto thy brother's wife, and marry her, and raise up seed to thy brother. Please note, there was this tradition where if it's almost like the kinsman redeemer type of situation. If you died and you left your wife, your wife was, you had no children, and you died, your brother, if he wasn't married, had the option to marry your wife and then raise up kids with her for your line, if that makes sense. So Judah's firstborn is married to Tamar, but he dies because he's wicked in the eyes of the Lord, and so the Lord slays him. And so Judah says to Onan, his second in line, "Go into your brother's wife, marry her, and raise up seed to your brother." Onan doesn't really like this idea, as we see verse 9. And Onan knew that the seed should not be his. And it came to pass when he went into his brother's wife that he spilled it on the ground, lest that he should give the seed to his brother. So he's not wanting to impregnate her because because in the eyes of society and everything, the kids won't even be his; they'll be his brother's. But that thing is evil in the eyes of the Lord, as we see in verse 10. And the thing which he did displeased the Lord, wherefore he slew him also. So both Judah's sons are wicked in the eyes of the Lord, and they die. Verse 11. Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, "Remain a widow at thy father's house, till Shelah my son be grown." For he said, "Lest peradventure he die also, as his brethren did." And Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house. So he sends Tamar back home to her father's house and says, "When my youngest son is of age, then you can marry him, but for now you're going to have to live the life of a widow." And in the process of time, the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died, and Judah was comforted and wept unto his sheep shearers, to Timnah, and his friend Harah, and the Adullamite. And it was told to Tamar, saying, "Behold, thy father-in-law goeth up to Timnah to shear his sheep." And she put her widow's garments off from her, and she covered her with a veil, and wrapped herself, and sat in the open place, which is by the way of Timnah. For she saw that Shelah was grown, and she was not given unto him as a wife. And when Judah saw her, he thought her to be a harlot, because she had covered her face. And he turned unto her by the way, and said, "Go, I pray thee, let me come in unto thee," for he knew not that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, "What wilt thou give me, that thou mayest come in unto me?" And he said, "I will send thee a kid from the flock." And she said, "Wilt thou give me a pledge till thou send it?" And he said, "What pledge shall I give thee?" And she said, Thy singlet, and thy bracelets, and thy staff that is in thy hand. And he gave it to her, and came in unto her, and she conceived by him. Okay. So Tamar sees that Reuben's youngest son is now an adult, and he's not giving her to him. Maybe he's afraid that that he'll end up dead, just like his other two sons, if he gives them to Tamar. She's been living the life of a widow, and she's fed up, so she contrives a deception, and she veils herself, dresses as a harlot. Judah, thinking that she is a harlot, not knowing that she is his daughter-in-law, decides to pay for the harlot to hire the prostitute. But he doesn't have anything to pay her, so she takes a pledge from him until he can bring a goat to pay for her later. And that is where we are in this story. I will give Judah a little bit of the benefit of the doubt in that he is lost his two sons. He is grieving potentially still the loss of his wife, and he's making, a bad decision here. Additionally, he doesn't know that it's Tamar, so it's not like he's intentionally sleeping with his daughter-in-law. This is just the way it plays out. And we will give him some credit because he will repent and acknowledge his sin here shortly. And he gave it to her, and came into her, and she conceived by him. Verse 19, and she rose and went away, and laid her veil from her, and put on the garments of her widowhood. And Judah sent the kid by hand of his friend, the Edomite, to receive his pledge from the woman's hand, but he found her not. And then he asked the men of that place, saying, Where is the harlot that was openly by the wayside? And they said, There is no harlot in this place. And he returned to Judah and said, I cannot find her. And also the men of the place said, There is no harlot in this place. And Judah said, Let her take it to her, lest we be shamed. Behold, I sent this kid, and thou hast not found her. And it came to pass about 3 months after that it was told Judah, saying, Tamar thy daughter-in-law hath played the harlot, and also, behold, she is with child by whoredom. And Judah said, Bring her forth, and let her be burnt. So that's interesting. If she played the role of a harlot, at least in their eyes, and has gotten pregnant, and Judah, who literally just hired a harlot 3 months before that, decides to play the hypocrite and demands that she be burned. Verse 25, And when she was brought forth, she sent to her father-in-law, saying, By the man whose these are, I am with child. And she said, Discern, I pray thee, whose are these, the signet, and the bracelet, and the staff? And Judah acknowledged them, and said, She hath been more righteous than I, because that I gave her not to Shelah, my son. And he knew her again no more. And it came to pass in the time of her travail that, behold, twins were in her womb. And it came to pass when she travailed that one put out his hand, and the midwife took and bound upon his hand a scarlet thread, saying, This came out first. And it came to pass as he drew back his hand, that, behold, his brother came out. And she said, How thou hast broken forth, this breach be upon thee. Therefore his name was called Pharez. And afterward came out his brother that had the scarlet thread upon his hand, and his name was called Zerah. So there is your story of Judah and Tamar. All right, we got 2 shorter chapters here. Well, they're both 23 verses long, where we deal with Joseph. He's tested by adversary. He's unfairly accused of rape. Verse 39, or chapter 39. And Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him of the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down thither. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. And Joseph found great in his sight, and he served him, and he made him overseer over his house, and all that he had put into his hand. So please note, Joseph sold it into Egypt. Potiphar buys him. He sees that Jehovah is with this man. Everything he does is blessed. So he makes him basically ruler over his household, and as a result, he is prospering, right? Verse 5, And it came to pass from time to time that he made him overseer in his house, and all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessings of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hands, and he knew not aught he had, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person, and well favored. Please note, most translations kind of hint that the King James is being very polite here. What's being said here is Joseph was very good looking with a nice build. Okay? Attractive man. Verse 7. And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, Lie with me. But he refused. And he said unto his master's wife, Behold, my master wotteth not what is with me in the house, and he hath committed all that he hath to my hand. There is none greater than in his house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from me, but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Oh, that we could all be like Joseph. No doubt Potiphar, a very powerful, very rich man, probably had a young, beautiful wife. She would have been very difficult to resist in this scenario, pushing herself onto Joseph. Who knows what methods of seduction she was using. But Joseph is a committed man of God. Instantly refuses. No way. How can I do this thing to my master? Joseph is putting forth the perfect example of loving God and loving your neighbor as yourself. He said, I can't do this to my master. Look at all he's done for me. And I cannot do this wicked thing and sin against God. Lord, give us the character of Joseph. Verse 10, And it came to pass, as she spake to Joseph day by day, that he hearkened not unto her to lie with her, or to be with her. So please note, this is happening all the time. It says day by day. You don't think there was days where Joseph was weak in the flesh? You don't think he ever had moments where it was way more difficult to say no than others? And yet, he walks in integrity. And it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men of the house there within. Now we have a scenario. Empty house. No one to see him but God. Right? No chance of being caught. And she caught him by his garment. Oh, that's interesting. Saying, "Lie with me." And he left his garment in her hand and fled and got him out. Again, Joseph giving us a perfect example of how to walk with God. Sin is at his door. He flees. He runs the other direction, leaving his garment behind. And it came to pass that she saw that he had left his garment in her hand, and was fled forth, that she called unto the men of her house, and she spake to them, saying, See, he hath brought in a Hebrew unto us to mock us. He came in unto me to lie with me, and I cried with a loud voice. And it came to pass when he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me, and fled, and got him out. And she laid up his garment by her until his Lord came home. And she spoke unto him according to these words, saying, The Hebrew servant which thou brought unto us came in to mock me. And came to pass, as I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me and fled out. And it came to pass, when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spoke unto him, saying, After this manner did thy servant come to me, that his wrath was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound. And he was there in the prison. But the Lord was with Joseph, and he showed him mercy, and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hands all the prisoners that were in the prison. And whatever they did there, he was the doer of it. The keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him. That which he did, the Lord made to prosper. So we have to acknowledge, hey, no matter what the circumstance Joseph finds himself in, and he's found himself in some pretty terrible ones, the Lord's hand is always with him. He's always giving him favor with whoever is in authority over him. And that is something that I think that we should pray for. It's certainly something I pray for. Give me favor with my boss. Give me favor with the place where I work. Give me favor with these people. Now, real quick, the garment. We go all the way back to Jacob and Isaac. Jacob needs to procure the blessing, the one that Esau had sold to him, but his father knows no different. So what does Jacob do? He puts on Esau's garment, goes in, deceives his father into thinking that he's Esau, and takes the blessing. He uses a garment to deceive. Many years later, his sons, they take Joseph's garment, dip it in blood, and what do? They bring it to their father and say, Is this not your son's garment? And they use the garment to deceive their father into thinking that Joseph is dead. Not long after, Joseph finds himself in Potiphar's house, and what happens? His garment is left behind, and what does she do? She uses the garment as deception. Look what the Hebrew boy left behind. And deceives Potiphar into thinking that Joseph tried to force himself on his wife. Very interesting, isn't it? There is a big study here when it comes to the garment. First garment created by God in the Garden of Eden. What was the purpose? It was to cover Adam and Eve's nakedness. God made it himself. All throughout the New Covenant scriptures, we hear this talk about the white garment that Jesus himself hands out. A covering for our nakedness and for our sin. Even in the parable of the wedding supper, he says, How did you get in here, my friend, without a garment? In the book of Revelation, we see him handing out garments. There's a study to be had here. Remember at the beginning of the show, I said I had something interesting to bring up, but I don't really have a good answer for it. I just find it compelling. Let's move on. We've got 23 verses here. Chapter 40. And it came to pass after these things that the butler of the king of Egypt and his baker offended their lord the king of Egypt. And the Pharaoh was wroth against the two of his officers, and again the chief of his butlers, and again the chief of the bakers, and he put them in the ward in the house of the captain and the guard into the prison, the place where Joseph was bound. And the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he served them, and they continued a season in ward. And they dreamed a dream, both of them, each man his dream in one night, and each man according to the interpretation of his dream. And the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt were bound in the prison. And Joseph came in unto them in the morning, and looked upon them, and behold, they were sad. And he asked Pharaoh's officers that were with him in the ward of his lord's house, saying, Wherefore look ye so sadly today? And they said unto them, We have dreamed a dream, and there is no interpreter of it. And Joseph said unto them, Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me then, I pray you. And the chief butler told him his dream to Joseph, and he said to him, In my dream, behold, the vine was before me, and the vine were 3 branches, and it was thought it budded, and her blossoms shot forth, and the clusters therefore brought forth ripe grapes. And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into the Pharaoh's cup, and I gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. And Joseph said unto him, This is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days, yet wherewith 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thy head and restore thee unto thy place. And thou shalt deliver Pharaoh's cup into his hand, after the former manner when thou wast his butler. But think on me when thou shalt be well with thee, and show kindness, I pray thee, unto me, and make mention of me unto Pharaoh, and bring me out of this house. For I indeed was stolen away out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also have I done nothing that they should put me in this dungeon. And when the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good, he said unto Joseph, I also was in my dream, and behold, I had 3 white baskets on my head. And the uppermost part there was of all manner of baked meats for Pharaoh, and the birds did eat them out of the basket upon my head. And Joseph answered and said, This is the interpretation thereof. The 3 baskets are 3 days, yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thy head from thee, and shall hang thee on a tree, and the birds shall eat thy flesh off of thee. And it came to pass on the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast unto all of his servants, and he lifted up his head, and the chief butler and the chief baker among his servants, and he restored the chief butler unto his butlership again, and he gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand, but he hanged the chief baker as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forgot him. So the story ends with Joseph interpreting these dreams. You know, throughout human history, dreams have been more than just dreams. They meant something. People would ponder on them and wrestle about them. They're sad in their cells, and Joseph says, What's going on? Why are you sad? And they said, We've had these dreams, but there's nobody to interpret it. They mean more than we think. There's something going on in those dreams. And of course, Joseph says, is an interpretation of dreams for God, and he does interpret them. He asks the butler to remember him. Hey, you're going to be restored to Pharaoh here in 3 days, according to your dream. Remember me. I was put here unfairly in this dungeon. But it says that the butler forgot him. And that's how we end our portion this morning. I pray that you've been blessed. And I pray I've given you some things to think about. Thank you for listening, my friends. Peace and grace be with all of you. And until next time, God bless.